And Joe Sestak is checking in with us once again to let us know what's happening on that campaign trail, what's happening in the world of Pennsylvania politics as he seeks the Democratic nomination to become the next United States Senator from Pennsylvania. Thanks for the call, Joe.
Steve, great to be back with you.
What's happening since we last talked with you? There's a lot going on. The Iranian deal looks closer to a vote in the United States Senate. What are you hearing?
Well, I think it is going to be perhaps not passed, but a resolution against it. But I think, as you have probably heard, there's enough senators that will prevent the veto by the president from being overridden. In fact, I'm going to do a town hall. I'm going to do a town hall at Villanova University in Montgomery, Delaware County area on this, because I'm going to, the ROTC unit there is hosting it right there, because I think this is an issue people should be out there discussing, and too often you find people aren't even out there taking positions. And I think with my military background, having actually operated in the Persian Gulf, having watched these Iranians, that it's incumbent upon me to put out there the ideas of why I think this support of this is the right thing.
Earlier this week, when U.S. Senator Bob Casey decided that he, too, would support the resolution, we talked with him on the air at some length, and I read the lengthy statement that he issued after making his decision. In reading that, you realize how complicated the issue is and how thoroughly you really need to evaluate the pros and the cons. A lot of the discussion I'm hearing seems very superficial, and these are discussions coming almost entirely from detractors, people who oppose this. It is complicated, is it not?
Without a question. And you point to something that we lack today in the United States Senate. We just don't have people down there like the Senator Sam Nunns of old, who actually had experience both by serving, but also by having been imbued and watched and dealing within foreign policy and military policies. I mean, the fact of the matter is, how many people actually understand that if this agreement fails, the cost that it will take us to take down that nuclear facility infrastructure of Iran? I mean, we can't even find their submarines in the shallow waters where the United States sonar of our Navy reverberates so much, so we'll have to withdraw. That's why being able to assess the details that you point out, but also the costs and the benefits, that if diplomacy fails, what it costs us to execute the military option, we just don't have that expertise anymore down there, at least not very deep.
For the past couple of days, I've started to see some news coverage, some press coverage in Pennsylvania newspapers, particularly about your opponent for the Democratic nomination, Katie McGinty. In fact, not only have you mentioned that she has not taken a position on this Iranian plan, I say your opponent, the person you want to be your opponent, U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, he's also somewhat critical of Katie McGinty. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with that.
Well, first off, I did not actually do that. I was asked a question about her, that she hadn't taken a position, and I said, no, let me just rise this to a higher level. I believe that we have a lack of experience in the United States Senate in both the Democrat side and the Republican side of those who can take on issues like this. And I feel that everyone should be able to get out there and talk about this in detail, because national security is the number one duty of the United States Senate as well as the President of the United States. The reporter who I went back to, and I said, wait a minute, you threw in my opponent's name in there. I'm talking across the board, because to me, it isn't about one person. To me, this is about the security of America, and I think too often we personalize things. So let Senator Toomey do what he said. I would talk about Senator Toomey, though, because he took on a position where he said, let's apply more crippling sanctions to Russia, to Iran. But he doesn't talk about well, what if Russia, which they will, walks away? Because without Russia applying sanctions, that leaves a very big donut hole upon which very much support for Iran's infrastructure, nuclear infrastructure, flows. And the lack of that experience, I think, is what harms us on a whole down in the United States Senate.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about Katie McGinty's position since she doesn't have one, but it's a lot easier to take issue with Senator Toomey because he does have a position, and you're intent in pointing out it's the wrong position.
It's absolutely the wrong position. And that's the danger. Do you remember, Steve, where he signed a letter to the Ayatollah?
I do. How could I forget?
Here's an Ayatollah said, "Death to America." And Senator Toomey wrote him a letter and say, disregard our presidency, not just our president, but the institution that our Constitution said is first and foremost responsible for security of America. Disregard it. You've got to deal with me, Senator Toomey. And I'm telling you, we're not going to approve any negotiations. I think that showed either an immaturity in foreign policy or politics truly no longer stops at the water's edge.
I'm reading relatively recent news reports as well about the Veterans Administration, and the news that's coming out is not necessarily good. The number of veterans who die waiting for health care. Tell us a little bit about your feelings when you heard that news.
Look, I have been a strong proponent of making sure that the cultural changes that in parts of the VA took hold got changed. Look, there was a senior living assisted facility for our veterans in Philadelphia where an inspection found live maggots falling out of a leg wound of a senior sitting there, urine sitting next to the breakfast of a senior in bed. What's with this? When I left Congress, my last meeting was with General Sestak, head of the VA, to bring this again to their attention. We have to fix this, but I will tell you this, that if you, on the whole, in many places of the VA, there is excellent treatment. In fact, you can find that you will get, and a study was done, the right prescribed treatment for a veteran 12% more often in the VA than you will with Medicare Advantage. So we can have good systems, but we got to root out the bad parts of it, and that's why Senator Toomey's vote against 12 appropriations bills for the VA, which would fund the VA properly, I think is outrageous.
And see, I've made these arguments, whether it be for the VA, whether it be for standing with good cops to root out bad cops. It makes sense that it can be done right because we do have good police officers. We do have good VA care. But when the level is not achieved, a level that is absolutely mandatory in terms of performance, that's when we got to take action. And I think that's the challenge of leadership. That's the challenge of taking bad government and turning it good. So when you have the opportunity to fund and to oversee, you really ought to fund and oversee. That's pretty much the position you're taking, Joe.
Without a question. That's called accountability, as you well know, Steve. Look, let's take it in a broader perspective here even. Senator Toomey said, I'm concerned about the increase in the suicide rates of our veterans. And yet when he went to Washington, D.C., he actually voted against the mental health bill. That was a standalone bill that would have put, just a few years ago, more money into post-traumatic stress disorder. He was on a radio show recently that said, I'm concerned about the higher unemployment rate for our veterans. It's wrong. It's inconceivable. And yet he voted against the standalone jobs bill for our veterans. Look, let's hold the VA accountable. When I know in Philadelphia that I was involved in an issue with the wrong type of treatment was being given for prostate cancer by VA and University of Pennsylvania doctors jointly, and the VA didn't stop it. Let's clean that up, but let's understand that let's get it properly funded and held accountable. And that's why Senator Toomey's votes against veterans consistently is something that is harmful both in the treatment of our veterans and preventing suicides, like the proper treatment would have been provided to so many by the mental health bill that actually didn't pass.
I normally wouldn't bring up Donald Trump's name, but apparently Trump is interested in breaking down state insurance barriers. That's something that you would want to stand against, I take.
No, I would be supportive of it. But here's the problem. Two of them. Everybody looks at this as a panacea. It's going to solve all our problems. In fact, those states that already have said, let's come on in, I'll let other states' insurance companies come in, have found that almost no one has come from another state into a third state. And here's why.
I see.
It's because it's really about networks, setting up contracts with doctors and hospitals so that customers will be able to get health care. Doctors sign up on contracts with certain health industries like Blue Cross Blue Shield here in Pennsylvania or Highmark, and breaking them away of that is almost impossible because insurance companies are exempt from antitrust law. We tried to get that broken in the Affordable Care Act. I voted to break them out of the antitrust law. That's why the Justice Department says 94% of all our health insurance markets are non-competitive because of this exemption from antitrust law. So that's what often prevents the state insurers from being able to have others come in and compete for these doctors on a fair playing field. So there's more than just breaking down barriers. We've got to actually break down this antitrust law that was passed in 1948.
So what's the next step on the campaign trail, Joe Sestak?
Going to be a great weekend. Headed up to Bethlehem, running up in a wonderful working families parade, I call it. It's a labor parade. Going to stop by a wonderful African American church there. Go to a picnic. Head on back down to a picnic for another church down there, and then the next day drive on out there. Want to hit up to Pittsburgh, Washington, and Greene County. It's a wonderful working families weekend because labor is good when labor stands up for what the AFL Charter says they are in existence for the working families. And here in Pennsylvania, as you well know, it's not about Washington, D.C.'s establishment. It is about whether you're standing up for working families, regardless of what Washington, D.C.'s even Democratic establishment thinks. And that's why I'm running around this great state this weekend.
And let's hope that everyone can celebrate that great labor holiday. Joe Sestak, we'll talk with you again soon. Good luck.
Thanks for having me aboard. Thanks, Steve. Great Labor Day to you.
Thank you, Joe.